Hi, my name's Brendon Granger. I'm the Technology Concierge. Today I'm joined by Jordan Hollander from Hotel Tech Report. Hey, Jordan, how are you?
I'm doing awesome. Thanks for having me, Brendan.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure. As we were saying off camera, it's taken us a little while to coordinate a time, but I think it will be well worth it. Jordan,
Absolutely. Sydney to LA is easy time zone wise once you figure it out.
it's actually not too bad. It's a reasonable time here. It's not like 3 a.m. or something, and it's still reasonable, which is good. I love what yourself and your brother Adam have done with the Hotel Tech Report. I mean, and I'll get you to in a sec, just give us a quick overview. But I love the fact when looking at your site, you said you created it to help educate, engage, and advise hoteliers on technology so that they can take advantage of it. And it's very similar to the philosophy behind the Hotel Technology Concierge series, where we try and help educate hoteliers on technology. So tell us a little bit about the Hotel Tech Report, Jordan.
Yeah, totally. So I think what we do is not so different from what you're doing for your hotel clients. And I think ultimately what we saw in the market is that there are not enough hotel technology concierges in the world, and that lots of hotels lack this kind of information and a steward to bring them an unbiased opinion about what solutions they should be using in the market. And so as a result of that, they kind of, were very reactive in what we found in the early days of Hotel Tech Report. Maybe, a PMS broke, or maybe they lost a payment integration, or a variety of other reasons. Maybe it's just a salesperson at a tech company reached out and they were reacting to that sales message. Yeah. So what we found was that hoteliers were not super proactive in how they were thinking about technology from a holistic perspective, and it wasn't their fault. They just didn't have access to the right information, tools, and resources to start on that journey because they're super busy handling guest needs and dealing with operations and reporting up to ownership and management groups. And so what we did is we wanted to make it really easy for them to figure out what are the solutions in the market for a specific query. What are users saying about those? What are their peers saying? So obviously you have hotels, a lot of hoteliers will rely on feedback from their peers. They go to local industry events. If they have, breakout meetings, lunch sessions with their local GMs, for example. But we wanted to help hoteliers really get that information at scale as software became a really globalized industry. And so Hotel Tech Report, the easiest way to describe what we do is we're TripAdvisor for hotel software. Hotel owners and managers and operators come on our site. They write reviews about the products they use. We have a rigorous verification process to ensure that those reviews and that content is authentic and unbiased, and it's not being influenced by vendor interference. Yep. And then their peers come on our site and are able to see, well, when you close that deal that sales rep reached out to you about, what is the experience actually like? And so everything that we do in our lives, whether we're booking a trip or looking for a restaurant reservation, we're reading reviews. And our mission with Hotel Tech Report is to bring the power of transparency, trust, and community to help hotel tech buyers who are, when you think about it, the stakes of a hotel technology decision are way bigger than where you're going to eat lunch. And we spend hours reading about where we're going to eat lunch. So, when you think about, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars, Australian over a multi-year period that you're locked in, and the opportunity cost of other systems, this is a massive decision. This is like halfway to getting married. And so you should have all the information you need to make a great decision around that. And that's what we provide.
That's fantastic. And it's a great site. I've read lots of your reports myself. And you're right. I will visit the site, and there are PMS vendors that I'm unaware of that are, very highly rated. It's a wonderful thing. And I think you're right. I've heard it said before, we spend more time planning our holiday than we do our life. And there's a great analogy that we spend more time, planning lunch than we do our next property management system. Often it just I see it, hoteliers will just go out and start getting demonstrations from vendors and then get pricing. And it's the vendors that they know, but your site allows them to actually identify vendors that they're potentially unaware of, but get some feedback as well, narrow things down. It's a great site.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jordan, the pandemic, we've heard a lot about the pandemic accelerating technology. They say, I think it was McKinsey that said we've progressed at least 7 years. I know the hotel industry's progressed. Do you think we've had the same push as far as technology goes? Has the pandemic progressed us 10 years, for example?
Yeah, great question. So I think there's, like the first thing that we do when we look at the progress of technology is like just looking at our own Google Analytics data. And so just looking at that as a proxy for like demand for hotel software. And so in March of 2020, I think we had less than 40,000 monthly users on Hotel Tech Report. Last month, we had 245,000 monthly users. So that's more than 500% growth in demand for hotel software using that data point as a proxy. And so like anecdotally, when we dig into why that is, I think it's pretty clear that wherever you looked in the hotel organization, you're looking at teams being scaled back, and we're still having kind of labor shortage challenges. So what can you really do and remember, these guests are paying multiples of what they were paying before the pandemic. So guests are paying more than ever, and the teams have less staff to service them. So what can a hotelier do? You can try to shift things around operationally. You can try and figure out more efficient routes for your housekeepers. There's all these things that you can try to do operationally, but ultimately the real lever that you can pull to become more efficient and actually understand what's the difference between this operational strategy and that operational strategy is technology. And so whether that's team collaboration tools to help staff members multitask better, whether that's more automated revenue management systems to help with dynamic pricing in real time based on new market data and future demand data, all across the organization, it's about getting more efficient. Even when you look at sales organizations, obviously business travel has kind of fallen off, and it's still not really where it was before the pandemic. But there's all these other types of group travel that have picked up, like family reunions of people who want to reconnect after the pandemic, or small breakout meetings. If a company has a headquarters in a city but no one's going into the office and they want to incentivize people to connect with each other or do team building activities or brainstorming, they'll often go to hotels for an offsite. So when you look at legacy sales processes of like, oh, we have JP Morgan come in every single year at this time, and it's the same group. Well, when that changes, you need to be really efficient in the sales software that you use to figure out, how am I going to change my prospecting strategies? How am I going to go after, instead of companies that are visiting San Francisco, how do I go after the companies in San Francisco? And so technology is really the only tool that hoteliers have, or really anyone in any type of business when you're short-staffed, to become more efficient and increase productivity.
Yeah, fantastic. There are some great points there, Jordan. I think you're right. Staffing shortages are a real issue, and unfortunately, I don't see them, that going away anytime soon. I think we need to leverage technology. You're right. The market has changed. We see it here in Australia. Whether rightly or wrongly, somebody was suggesting yesterday, perhaps we kept our borders closed a little bit too long. Our international visitors are not back. Corporates are not yet traveling in the numbers. I think I was listening to something yesterday that said it'll be 2026 before we get back to that, $1.5 trillion value from business travel. And technology, I think, is got to help us pick up the slack to deliver the service. As you said, rates, certainly here in Australia and US as well, are above what they were in 2019, although obviously occupancy is down, but things are good. And guest expectations are extremely high as well.
Absolutely. That's totally what we're saying.
So what is the number one piece of technology in your mind that perhaps a hotel should be looking at to help?
Yeah. So, I think it really depends on the hotel, the market segment, the region. There's obviously a lot of variables that come into it. I think it's all about figuring out where your bottlenecks are. So like, for example, if we're talking about a luxury resort in the Maldives, we're probably going to be talking about a different solution than, a budget hotel in Northern California. And so, one of the tools that I think is really interesting and compelling from the luxury side is a company called Selfbook. And the reason that I think Selfbook is so interesting, I'm not sure if you've heard of them, but basically they've built this graphical user interface overlaid onto some of the legacy booking engine and CRS software, and it allows this modern booking experience that feels like you're booking a hotel. It feels the same way that you're paying for goods on a Shopify platform. And so it increases conversion rate for hotels. It streamlines the payment flows by having mobile wallets accepted, local payment methods, and it really helps hotels capture more demand in their market and market their services. So it creates that competitive advantage, as well as increasing the conversion rate on the website. And ultimately, when you can increase conversion rate on your website, you could spend more on ad dollars, because those ad dollars are driving more profitability. And so I think that's like one really interesting tool. There's a bunch, but I think ultimately when we think about technology, unfortunately, there's a lot of cool stuff out there that I know we'll talk about later in this. But the property management system is the ultimate place that every hotelier has to look. You have to think about, is my property management system innovating, building new features, Does it have an easy user interface when I turn over new staff? Does it have the integrations that I need? What's the payments infrastructure look like? And so thinking about your property management system as like, before I go to level 2 of like, what are all these kind of really cool tools that I could add to make my hotel more efficient? You're going to get bottlenecked if you don't have the right property management system as the core of that tech stack. So that's always where we recommend starting. And so once a hotel has a really effective property management system, let's say that they're using Muse, for example, they'll know all the different integrations that are available for Muse, and then we can start picking the ones that are going to drive their business goals. But ultimately, for us, it's less. We really want to encourage hoteliers to be proactive instead of reactive about their technology. And so rather thinking about something that, oh, we heard this hotel does this down the street, we want them to we encourage our audience to always start with what are the business problems or opportunities that we want to go after this quarter, and then fill in the technology that can meet those. So if you want to drive more ancillary revenue, you might be looking at a mobile ordering solution like Saba, who I know you work with, or you might be looking at upselling software like Canary or Oki. And so it really depends on like, what are your business goals? And for each hotelier within a hotel, it's also going to vary. So it really depends on who is the persona, what are their specific goals that they're driving towards, and then aligning the technology around those goals.
That's a fantastic answer. I love the fact, as you said, the PMS is still the core, and you need to make sure that you've got a strong PMS. These days, it probably should be cloud-based, to give you maximum flexibility. The point about usability is a great one, because with the turnover we're seeing, you want your staff to be able to come in and pick that system up as quickly as possible, potentially by watching a couple of videos rather than having to go through a formal training session, with your vendor. I hate to say it, I worked for a PMS vendor years ago, and, I started in the installation section, and I'd spend 9 hours a day training people on how to use the PMS. It was that complex back then.
Yeah, the world has changed a lot, and it's like, and I always say, it's like you don't need a training session for an iPhone, and that's where all design should ultimately lead. I was in the Apple store the other day, and they were doing a tutorial on how to take pictures, which was interesting, but you shouldn't need that.
Yeah, I think there are probably some tips and tricks to taking better pictures. I think the cameras on phones have become so complex now. There are so many things you can turn off and on, and delayed timing and night mode. It can be confusing, actually.
Totally. So you're absolutely right, and I think the same thing goes for like a PMS. It needs to be easy enough to pick up and be intuitive for the staff who's turning over. We obviously are in an industry where there's a lot of staff turnover, and now more than ever. And so it needs to be easy enough for someone to pick up as an elementary user or an introductory user. But then what that also allows is every other user to skip past level 1 and start focusing on more advanced integrations, workflows. Maybe it's like, figuring out how to credit Saba orders onto the folio so that no charge is made, or maybe it's taking Apple payments, adding it to the folio and deducting it. So like, what are the things that are going to make a more frictionless guest experience and provide better data to the hotel to make better decisions? And so it allows those elementary users to get into the funnel and use the software without needing training. But then it allows the advanced users to really go to those PMS companies and develop more advanced workflows and automations. Yeah,
that's a great point. Jordan, it's been said a lot that, the hotel industry lags behind from a technology point of view. I think it was Max that highlighted, McKinsey said that we rate just above hunting, in our use of technology. So we're at that bottom of the list. Why do you think it is that we lag behind?
Yeah, I think I think it always breaks down. I think this kind of dovetails from our last question. In hospitality, you have multiple users or user personas of a product. So the example that I'll give is like a revenue management professional is not using the same tools as a marketer, is not using the same tools as someone in ops. And now there's more overlays and integrations between those, but you have multiple users, and so there's this operational complexity. Even within operations, you have, let's say, 50 users using, a tool. Let's say it's HotelKit or Alice for, team collaboration. You could have 50 users, 100 users at a property using this. So it makes it really challenging to test new things, because you then have to get 100 users trained onto this new workflow. Whereas, if you look at e-commerce, for example, maybe you have a marketing manager at a $10 million revenue denim company, they're going to, sign up with a new Google Ads optimization tool, and they could try that themselves. Whereas in hotels, many of these tools rely on multiple stakeholders, so it makes it really hard to try, test, iterate. So the decisions kind of get slowed down, and I think that leads to a less rapid evolution in terms of those technologies. And it obviously makes it harder for the vendors to try some of those new things. So I think that's one component. That's not really anyone's fault. It's just kind of a characteristic of the business.
Yeah.
I think in terms of complexity, like you also look at distribution. So if you look at, kind of the bed banks, travel agencies, the direct bookings, the OTAs, there's so many just different distribution players that all have different payment methodologies, different transaction flows, different payment terms. And so everything in the booking flow becomes more complex. So it's like, just to be able to provide a new innovation like self-book, you now need all of these integrations to be able to work just to sit at the table. And so there's less self-books that are able to come to market. And obviously that means that the ones who do come to market are well-resourced and they're getting some nice traction, which is great. And then the last piece I think is like high turnover. So when you have hoteliers that are, leaving a property, one foot out the door, head into the next one, it's harder for them to stick around and try a new initiative. And so I think like a higher turnover industry traditionally has more trouble investing in technology. I mean, we see it in our own business. If we're in the sales process with a prospective client on the software side, and we're in it for 3 months, and then the marketer or whoever it is that's the stakeholder leaves the company, it kind of puts that decision on ice. Now we have to go figure out who's the next stakeholder. I think a lot of these software companies are dealing with something very similar, where it's kind of like you're building these relationships over a long term, but you might have a bit of a revolving door in certain properties or markets or segments. And so it makes it really hard to deploy that new technology. And ultimately the hotels are the ones that get hurt, because nobody wants to make that decision and be the one who's responsible for it if there's no real long-term skin in the game for them on the other side.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I've never heard that last piece mentioned, that turnover has an impact, but it does. I mean, you're right. Some of the sales cycles are a year or so, and I think that turnover is only being heightened as a result of post-pandemic changes. I can think of a couple of companies that I've been dealing with that, literally on a Friday, you are talking to somebody, and then the following Friday, they're no longer at the company. And you're right, you're starting from scratch again and doing that education piece potentially, because what we see, sometimes there's not even a handover. So you are literally starting from scratch and having a complete brand new conversation with that person about the particular technology and how it could benefit from them, which does make it really difficult.
Totally. And again, I think it's really not the fault of those employees. I mean, I think when you look at hotel groups, there's a super high correlation between how employers treat their teams and their people, in terms of like, those hotel brands that have really great relationships with their teams, and innovation and their ability to make long-term progress towards more efficiency, better results. It's because, those employees feel ownership in the business. They're presumably paid better than at other groups, and they feel like they feel this owner mentality that you don't feel if you're kind of getting minimum wage and like you just came in and you're doing the basics and your owner treats you like crap. And, it's all about that employee and owner relationship. And this isn't unique to hotels. Any business that's able to empower its team, to compensate them fairly, and provide them the bandwidth to take risks and take a long-term view, are going to innovate much faster than, a company that is risk averse, treats their team poorly, and underpays them. You're just going to find that kind of revolving door. And I think as an industry, it's our responsibility to compensate better, to treat our people better, and to give them the ability to take, strategic risks, obviously within reason, that have a long-term focus instead of strictly that kind of short-termism.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I think as an industry, we have to do some work, unfortunately. You've probably heard, entry into hospitality courses, our future management numbers are down. As a profession, we're sort of not in favor anymore. And I think we need to change that. We need to somehow rekindle the fact that, hospitality can be a career, and it can be a great one. It gives you so many opportunities to travel if you wish to do that. So
absolutely.
Jordan, we talked about obviously lots of different systems in hotels, and interfaces have always been an issue. I think we're making some progress. What are your thoughts? I mean, are we getting better at interfacing between systems?
Yeah, I think undeniably we're getting better. I mean, I think you look at legacy players like Oracle's advancements with OHIP, I think Protel and SMP and building their app store interface, and that we power all the reviews in Protel's app store as an example. I think that you see the legacy companies that are really taking incentive in this. Like we even hear from competitors of some of those companies commending them on the moves they're making just because it's better for the industry. Then you also have third-party integration tools, Happy as being kind of the gold standard in integrations, where it's basically like if a vendor doesn't have dedicated build onto a PMS API, Happy has a universal API that the vendor could build to and get specific data points from those vendors in a secure way. So I think both like internally at the companies and externally, and then the kind of newer like next gen companies like Amuse, it's just API, APIs have been a focus from day one, and making sure that their app store ecosystem is healthy and that people can develop new solutions on top of theirs. I think some of those newer players have started with that mentality and not had the crutch of legacy technology that they have to evolve from. But that's all natural course of evolution and technology. And I think some of the the leading players like Oracle have done a great job of really putting that into focus, shining a light on the integrations program, and really kind of stepping things up to the next level in the last even like 12 to 18 months.
That's a great point. Yeah, I think it's always going to be a bit of a challenge, but you're right. People like Muse have done a great job in encouraging the industry. I suppose setting the gold standard, really, particularly, if you're a Muse customer and you want to try something, it's quick and easy to actually try a new product without any costs involved or time.
Totally.
That's often an issue we see with some of the systems.
Yeah, and I think the one area where we still lag a bit is the user interface around integrations. So like, the example for kind of like broader software, the gold standard would be Zapier. So Zapier allows you to basically, without being a developer, you can connect tools and set up dedicated workflows. And I think our industry has a ways to go in terms of building out those templates or those menu items, if you will, to say, okay, when a guest checks in on Muse, I want this to happen in Oki that then triggers this promotion on a SweetPad tablet. And so it's like, I think there's still not the graphical user interfaces and templates built out, which, makes those integrations more rigid. And by making it more rigid, it means that there's a less ability of the hoteliers to be creative in the kinds of things that they're testing. And so I think in this next 5 years, it seems like the wiring and the infrastructure is there now. I'd love to see companies in their partnerships starting to get more creative around visualizing and giving options to hoteliers around what different workflows they want to see between those tools.
Yeah. Okay. That is a great point. Yeah. A tool like Zapier for the hotel industry would be fantastic. Jordan, voice assistants, they were popular at high tech, I think, in 2017, 2018, probably a year or so after they came out on the market.
Yeah.
I've got my thoughts, and I've got an article coming out actually next week, but I just wanted to get your thoughts. Do you think guests are ready for them? Are guests expecting voice assistants in the room? And is there benefit and an ROI?
So I think when you go to like the Vegas properties here in the US, you're starting to see them more.
Yep.
My personal opinion, I mean, it's clear that voice is taking a larger and larger share of search. I'm not, personally, I'm a little bit biased. I'm not like a big Siri guy. I haven't really adopted voice myself in a major way. So, personally, when I go to a hotel, and I was, as I try to think about, that exact question before, I try to think about so to be totally honest, I unplug the device when I get to the hotel for privacy reasons. Yep. And when I think, and I'm not one of those people who's like a freak about privacy and I need all my data. I actually don't care. As long as I'm getting enough value out of something, yes, I am totally happy to give up my privacy. I have nothing really to hide. And so when it comes to like Google, for example, they're providing me, Google Docs, Gmail. I don't mind them having access to all my data. Those are such valuable tools to me. And I think when it comes to voice, the calculation just isn't there yet. Like I would almost rather, text or use like a web app to order some, a hamburger at the hotel than like talk to Alexa or Siri or whoever's the voice assistant. So for me personally, it's just that, that calculation of, okay, well, if there is a company listening to my conversation, I know it's highly improbable, in the hotel. am I getting enough value from this for it to make sense? And the answer is probably not yet, but I could see a world in the future where it does get more efficient and, it's more integrated into all the different IoT systems. But then there's also the component of kind of like picking up, all of the commands within a hotel. If you're using Siri, you learn all the commands that you really need in a day, and then you use it over and over and over again. When you get to the hotel, like you don't maybe you have like a little card that tells you what you should be, saying to the device. But most of the time, what I've found is like, it's like playing music, but it's like not my music. It's kind of, maybe it's like, maybe it's XM radio or something. And so, yeah, the cost benefit analysis just hasn't penciled out. And I think a lot of consumers probably feel the same way in terms of like not wanting to be listened to. But again, millions and millions of consumers, maybe even billions at this point, have smart speakers in their homes. So I think it'll become, more and more natural for people. But I don't know if it's that much better than a web app or a messaging system. And it's really just a matter of preference.
Yes, that's a really great point. I think your point about convenience is a good one. I'm a Google avid user. There's Google just piped up actually. And, I've actually signed up for a lot of the beta stuff, and I have location services on, and, every month Google gives me a report of, how many kilometers I've flown and driven, had in restaurants. And I find it convenient. Even the other day, my daughter's learning to drive, and here in Australia, you have to clock up 120 hours and it needs to be kept in a logbook. And we were actually driving from Melbourne to Sydney, and she forgot to write down what time we left a particular location. Well, I just look in Google history and it tells me you were here at 7:05 p.m. It's crazy, and it's so accurate. But I think you're right. I'm a self-confessed geek. I won't say the word, but I've got 5 of those devices here. I've got lights connected. I've got lots of things connected. I love it. Yep. But it still can be very frustrating technology. And I think you need to learn how to use the technology. And guests, when they get to a hotel, they don't have the time or the inclination. If you get to a hotel and it's late and you want a burger or something, you could easily pick up the phone, or you could just, as you said, use a web-based app, scan a code, and have it delivered to you quickly and easily. So it's that, where is the benefit from the guest point of view, I think. And I think somebody even said, and they might be right, as we move to more of a bring your own device, maybe in the future it is your device and your voice assistant that you're happy with, be it, Siri or Google or Bixby, for example. Somehow that integrates with the hotel to give you a better experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Going on then, robots. We talk about robots, and I suppose we talk about AI because I know there's robots that are physical in nature, like Rosie from MaidBot, that are actually helping clean rooms by vacuuming function areas. And then we've got robots that are actually doing keystrokes, actually completing night audits behind the scenes as well. Where do you think they fit in? I suppose we can treat them as 2 separate things, the software-based robots, as in that AI, and then potentially the physical robots, where do you think they play a part, and how long before you think we see them become relatively mainstream?
Yeah, I think a lot of us watched the Tesla kind of consumer robot demo last week, and it's clear that robots, in that capacity are still pretty far off. And I think the hotel industry will be further off than consumer robots, again, just because we use them in our homes day to day. And if they could provide that kind of convenience and value, it's going to add so much more value at home than it would in a hotel environment. So I think that kind of futuristic robot concept will take time. To your point about, keystrokes, I think robotic process automation is a huge value add. There's so many manual reports, exports, transfers of data between systems that can all be automated and are being automated. And so I think that's happening in a huge way. We're seeing you probably saw Actable. So it's a combination of Alice, Transcendent, Hotel Effectiveness, and Profit Sword. And so they're basically taking the data from the input systems like a labor management system and correlating it with the data in a P&L from Profit Sword. And so now you can actually see how changes in labor are affecting your cost of labor on your P&L in semi-real time. And this is still early days, but that's something that a management company would have had a team of analysts trying to do in the past. And those analysts would have spent most of their hours on data entry and standardization and cleaning. And now that part's done, and now they can get creative with that data. And same things that we saw, in the hedge fund world as we had algorithmic trading. So I think we're going to start seeing more kind of, transfers of data, and then also using machine learning and AI to understand that data better and recognize patterns that the human eye might not have recognized. And we may not even know why, or have a hypothesis about what caused a certain, change in the P&L, but the computers and artificial intelligence can tell us that. So I think that's a huge area for improvement, that the technology is already there, ready to go, and now it's just applying it to this market. I think when it comes to kind of, I would say, like dumb versions of the Tesla robot, so like, the robotics are really taking hold in repetitive, highly labor-intensive environments, so factories, those kinds of factory line environments, industrial settings, where it's a really challenging work environment, really repetitive process, and really taxing on the human body. And so I think when you look at hotels, one of the hardest jobs obviously is housekeeping, but housekeeping requires so much nuance with different room types and different, every room is different. Every room is in a different condition. Every turn requires, a different level of service. And so I think it's still a ways off before we have a housekeeping robot that could really make a dent in that role. I think like in general hospitality, I think that somewhere like a multi-location franchise business like McDonald's or Chipotle, those types of environments will be the first hospitality businesses to see more of that robotics coming into it, because it's really like a factory line in the back of those restaurants. And so I think hotel restaurants are, obviously mostly geared towards more bespoke experiences. And so it'll take a little longer, but maybe dishwashing robots. Obviously during the pandemic, we saw UV light robots that would kind of sanitize rooms. Not so sure how necessary that is, or was, but it's, every hotelier can make that decision for themselves. But I think those kinds of environments and specific use cases are where we'll see it in terms of like physical hardware robots.
Yep. Behind the scenes, as you said, dangerous, dirty, and repetitive tasks.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. Jordan, what would be your 3 top technologies that for 2023?
Yeah, so I mean, Selfbook, as I mentioned before, is the company that is just, we tried to invest in them and they closed their initial round before we got in. So I'm still a little bummed about that. But what they've done of just like building over the legacy infrastructure and creating modern experiences without requiring hotels to rip out anything has been super impressive. I think, the user interface design and conversion has been something that's been lacking in the hotel industry for a long time. So it's really cool to see that. They've been picking up some amazing hotel groups really quickly because of the value that they're providing. And I think their roadmap looks really interesting coming forward. I can't talk too much about. I mentioned Actable. So that's the team at ASG where, for disclosure, I'm an advisor. So I'm a little bit biased, but I think what they're doing, the reason that I said yes to those guys, I think what they're doing is really interesting. And to the point earlier about Zapier for hotels and having those workflows that hoteliers can actually see and build those different connections between their tools and how they work. I think what ASG is doing with Actable is really interesting because they're connecting the inputs and outputs software. And I think that's been the problem with a lot of data that we have in the hotel industry, is it's a vendor that's providing analytics and thousands of dashboards, and then it's like, okay, well, what do we do with that? And like, if we don't, but now it's to the point where like, someone at a hotel could say, well, what if we have our housekeepers skip every other floor, and then let's just watch what happens to our housekeeping line on our P&L over the next 3 months and set up a test. So I think really giving hoteliers the tools to like make those strategic decisions or changes in their operations and then track it into their actual business outcomes is really, really interesting. We're starting to do some work with Stripe, who's like the global payments provider, like the $100 billion company from Ireland. But what they're doing is a lot of our clients who are the hotel software companies, like, the channel managers and PMSs are built on Stripe, and Stripe is providing them the ability. So historically, the way it would work is like, a PMS would have to integrate with 14 different payments processors, and each region would have 2 or 3 that the hoteliers could choose. And then there would be a lack of coverage. So it's like maybe, a PMS wants to sell into Australia, but now they don't have those integrations yet. So they're kind of like bottlenecked and can't serve that market. And then Australia is missing out on this great new system. So Stripe basically does all the blocking and tackling for these tech companies when it comes to payments. So chargeback risk modeling, alternative payment methods, global compliance. And now it's like all these companies are able to just start building their software and deploying it globally, which is really, really cool. And so we're seeing a lot more companies get on the wagon with that. The other cool thing is that Stripe allows these companies to monetize their payments. So instead of paying a payments processor 3%, and monetize their payments, by the way, in a way that doesn't impact the hoteliers. There's no additional cost to them, and the software companies are getting more resources. So instead of payments processor getting 3%, now a vendor can choose a split with Stripe based on negotiations on the back end. The hotelier still pays the same 3%, or usually actually even lower, but now the vendor is getting 1% of that, and they're able to invest that back into R&D, which ultimately builds more features for the hotelier without the hotelier paying for it. So it's like a win-win, and it's something that we're seeing a lot of companies in the PMS and channel management space get into. I think there's a company called Hirology out of Chicago that does a full stack applicant tracking system and purpose-built hiring software for the hotel industry. Well, it's for multi-location, so they do car dealerships and a couple other verticals as well. But for restaurants and hotels, I think hotels have historically thought of HR as this administrative function. It's like, we're going to put a sign on our, on our glass window in the front of our hotel that says we're hiring. And then we're going to have someone who signs off on all the hiring documents and make sure there's not sexual harassment or all those other, important things. But then it's like, there's no actual hiring strategy. And I think we all know that talent is the most important determinant of business success. And so I think a tool like Hirology can help hotels be more proactive about their hiring strategy. So those are a few. There's a lot of cool stuff going on the market. Going back to your question about has the industry advanced? I mean, we're seeing tons of capital come into this market like never before. That's really why it takes some of these advisor positions with private equity and venture capital firms, trying to help them see the opportunity within the hospitality industry and bring more resources in so that these companies can grow, the ones that you and I both work with. And we're seeing a ton of that. We're seeing a lot of consolidation. So smaller companies getting, bolted into bigger companies that can help them grow faster and deploy some really cool niche tools into a broader set of hotels. So there's a lot of kind of musical chairs going into this, but the pie is growing, hoteliers are getting smarter, and there's just so much cool stuff going on in the industry right now.
Wow, you're right. There is some really cool stuff there. And I think, it's just going to benefit the industry. That's great. It's great to hear. Jordan, a personal question. If you could have anything printed on a t-shirt, what would that be?
I mean, judging based on my t-shirt right now, I think I probably wouldn't print anything. I'm like a plain shirt guy.
That's fine. I think
I like to keep it simple.
No. Black t-shirts are just, one of those key items that you can just pull out and put on and look good all the time.
Yep, absolutely.
I'm with you. If I wasn't doing an interview, then I actually have a whole bunch of these same shirts, and my daughter's like, oh my God, why don't you have some taste? It's a little bit Steve Jobs-ish, it's like pull on the pair of jeans and I've got 4 of these shirts that are identical with a collar, and I just like them. They're good. As we wrap up, any final thoughts or advice regarding technology that you'd love to give hoteliers?
Yeah, I think it really all comes back to being proactive about how you think about technology. Don't let a sales pitch persuade you. You should try something. Don't do it because someone in the hotel next door is doing it. Those are all reasons why you might want to explore something and just you should get educated. And we always encourage hoteliers constantly be getting demos. I mean, Netflix CEO Reed Hastings would tell his employees to go out and constantly interview at other companies so they can know their worth. And I think if you kind of graph that onto hotels, it's obviously a very extreme kind of way to think about employment. But if you graph that onto hotels, if every hotelier should be trying new products every month and getting demos and building relationships with the software companies. And that's how they're going to get educated on what's out there. But when they think about decisions, it shouldn't be based on those relationships. It shouldn't be based on any of that other stuff I mentioned. It should be based on what's their goal right now. and then framing everything around how do they meet that goal. And maybe technology isn't the right solution to meet that goal in a specific case. I would argue that 9 times out of 10, technology is probably the solution. But starting with the framework, going towards a business goal, an operational goal, solving a pain point, fixing a gap, filling a gap, and then figuring out how technology, if technology is the right solution, how it plays into that. So just really being proactive and not reactive in their strategies.
Yeah, some great points. Yeah, technology, I would agree, 9 times out of 10, but it can't solve all problems. You're quite right. And I think your point about being proactive is an ideal one. Following things like Hotel Tech Report is a good way for people to keep up to date with what's going on. Obviously, looking at guest complaints, looking at bottlenecks within their operation and how they can streamline those.
Totally.
And I think, I interviewed Max Stuckoff a while ago, and he said, we need a person within a hotel that is he called it a technologist. They're not necessarily a geek, but they're a person that can actually look at the operation and look at technology and work out how that technology can actually benefit the operation. And I think that's a role that I see is lacking in hotels at the moment.
Yep.
And even more so because I think we as we started, the shortage in labor at the moment means that everybody's got their sleeves rolled up and they are in the thick of it. And what I'm seeing is that hoteliers from general manager right down are so busy, obviously looking after the guests, making sure that everything's perfect, that they're not, to be honest, they don't have the chance to be proactive at this point in time.
Totally. And I think it's the same with any management. Like, you look at most, public company CEOs, and their whole job coming on is to make their job go away. So they should be able to be pulled out of the equation, and the business should run efficiently without them. And I think GM still, just because of a lot of these manual processes of the past, are still forced to be super tactical. And I think what we're going to see over time is not, an iteration of or evolution of what Max was saying in terms of, I don't know if it's necessarily a digital role, but I think as GMs can be less focused on day-to-day revenue management strategy because the tools are there, less focused on ad strategy and marketing budget because the tools are there, less focused on sales because there's more visibility into that operation, then they can start kind of disrupting themselves and start thinking about getting more proactive and thinking about the future instead of thinking about today and yesterday and how to handle all those things. So I think it's really just kind of specialization, optimization, and automation, and then that will free up the GM to almost look like at a tech company, a product manager, and the hotel is their product. Yeah,
no, that's a great analogy. I love that. Jordan, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Brendon. Glad we can make this happen.
Excellent. Thanks, Jordan.